Hey you. Yeah, you watching. My analytics tell me the majority of my viewers who watch aren't actually subscribed, so yeah, you should fix that and subscribe. Do it now. I know I've said this countless times at this point, but it can never be overstated. The fact that Twisted Metal Season 1 was not an execrable pile of absolute human shit is about as big of a miracle as you could possibly have.
Baba Booey.
It had everything working against it, including being a series that never really had any set characters or story, so therefore nothing to base anything off of. And then they released that horrible first teaser and all hope left the universe, because it was quite literally the most cringeworthy scene in the entire season, and as of yet, the entire show. I hope whoever decided to make that the first thing anyone saw of the show was fired, because it's completely misrepresentative of the whole experience. That is to say, schlocktastic, but in a good way. Something that's equal parts fun and weirdly earnest, despite having a sense of humor about itself.
It's actually pretty sweet.
Sometimes the humor was god-awful, such as the entirety of episode 1, and sometimes the dramatic elements were a bit laughable, such as that moment where they tried to have a dramatic scene with the song My Immortal by Evanescence playing. Here's the thing, people. You cannot have a dramatic scene with an Evanescence song. Evanescence and their lyrics have been memed for so long that it's impossible for me to take anything involving them seriously. Either way, Twisted Metal Season 1 was pretty much universally loved, and I was happy to see them get greenlit for a second season. With that said, I have done absolutely everything I can to avoid all advertising material for Season 2 because I did not want the chance of getting a negative first impression again. I wanted to view this season completely and utterly blind and untainted, and like last time, I'm not necessarily looking for much. Really, I'm just looking for more of the same as far as tone, writing, and acting, only this time with a higher budget and a properly presented version of the Twisted Metal Tournament. And did the season achieve that? Well, I guess we'll have to find out. A bit of a recap is in order. In 2002, there was a sudden apocalypse caused by all the electronics in the world simultaneously malfunctioning. As a result, the circumstances led there to be a split in what society that remained, with the people lucky enough to live in these walled cities living in relative prosperity, while those outside the cities were left to fend for themselves. However, the need to transport goods from city to city meant that a vital aspect of the New World economy relied on couriers, or milkmen as they would come to be known. And of these milkmen, the absolute best of them was a man simply known as John Doe, an amnesiac orphan who was so good at what he did that his skill earned the attention of a woman named Raven, who was the leader of New San Francisco. That will be contradicted in this season, sort of. But never mind. She gets John to get a package for her halfway across the country as an initiation test to become a citizen of the city. During the quest for the package, he meets a woman who he names Quiet because she doesn't talk for a while. And they eventually become an item just in time for John Doe to complete his mission and become a citizen of New San Francisco, but he's forced to leave her behind. Quiet then becomes the anti-milkman, stealing items from the couriers and giving it to the people outside of the big cities. The last shot we see of her is being confronted by a bunch of people in doll masks. There were several other stories during this time, such as the story of Sweet Tooth, in this case characterized as a clown who's a showman who lives for the applause, and as such is able to recruit an entire cult's worth of people.
No! Harold, why did you kill everybody?
But he's also off his f***ing rocker, and as such is a creature of chaos who fights the villains but also fights innocent people as well. All largely depending on how they validate him. As I said at the time, that's smart because he's the most well-known character, so you don't want him to be a straight-up villain all the time. But it's also not wrong to present him as a villain at times. Hence, at the end of the season, he tracks down Mike and Stu, who had a nice little mutual character arc, but it's all for naught when Sweet Tooth seemingly kills Mike and kidnaps Stu to become his lackey. And in the end, as it turns out, the package that John was sent to get was completely arbitrary, and it was all just a test to see if John was ready. Ready for what? Ready to represent Raven in the Twisted Metal Tournament. A destruction derby battle to the death where the winner receives one wish for whatever they want. And that's where we start. As we begin, 7 months have passed. John Doe has been forced into a routine where every day he has to practice driving to keep his skill sharp for when the Twisted Metal Tournament officially gets announced.
John Doe, pizza delivery.
His constant attempts to escape in order to find Quiet are met with increasing opposition. Meanwhile, Quiet ends up joining the gang of doll-faced warriors that confronted her, and creatively, the gang is just called the Dolls. The Dolls are essentially an activist group of bisexual people, mostly women, who split their time between disrupting supply lines and getting shit-faced. Incidentally, where do I sign up? their goal being to disrupt all the supply lines between the major cities in an attempt to try and re-establish equality between the outside and the inside. So what is the overarching story of this season? Well, it's twisted metal. Last season was the prelude, showing you the lore, setting up the characters and relationship dynamics, and telling a story that, much like a homing missile, locked in on setting up the titular tournament. So now either we're waiting for the tournament to be announced, we're traveling to the tournament, or we're competing in the tournament. It's the only thing that really matters in the story at the end of the day. The very first thing I noticed when starting this season was Raven. In the previous season, she was played by Neve Campbell, and I love Neve Campbell. She's great. But now Raven is inexplicably played by Patty Guggenheim, and this wasn't one of those recastings you weren't supposed to notice. They actually draw attention to this. The idea is there are multiple Ravens that each run a district of the city, and this is the real Raven who runs everything behind the scenes and is apparently a ruthless dictator. You know she's the real Raven because she's the one they give the backstory based on Raven from Twisted Metal Black. You'd think that this was them trying to hand-wave away a recasting, but this was actually a conscious choice, because apparently the showrunners liked the idea of having an overseeing dictator behind everything. But I also read somewhere that Neve Campbell demanded too high a price to be a recurring character, which is weird because Anthony Mackie is one of the biggest names of the MCU right now, so believe what you want to believe. For what it's worth, I like Patty Guggenheim in the role. She has an unsuspecting callousness to her. She pulls off a performance that really sells the "don't let my appearance fool you" nature of the character, though replacing old Raven kind of undermines the drama of the first season because they decide to retroactively establish that the person whom we were doing all the work for wasn't even the person in charge, nor the reason why we were entering the tournament. Then again, the continuity isn't exactly the best in this show to begin with. Like, there's this one really good cold open, which is a flashback to John on the road as a milkman, and he just so happens to meet Calypso, who's tagging a road sign saying Calypso is real. Something we saw throughout Season 1. This guy clearly shows himself to have mystical abilities, and with these two things in mind, it should be obvious to John that if this guy isn't Calypso, then Calypso is at the very least powerful.
What do I know? I'm just a man with a ladder.
But then in Season 1, he expressed astonishment when he met Calypso, as if the concept was new to him and he never interacted with anything related to Calypso.
I read that name everywhere. Believe in Calypso. Calypso is real.
Yeah, are you him?
So that's a bit odd. Now, in spite of the fact that we already had an entire season of the show, Episode 1 has a lot to get through. I feel like it was because a lot of the first season was built around a plot MacGuffin, and you don't really know its purpose until the end of the final episode. So they had to hold back a lot of those details, and now every detail has to be filled in simultaneously. I was actually afraid because this episode is overstuffed and it takes a while to get going. They have to establish the dolls, they have to reintroduce Sweet Tooth and show you what his motivation is for the season, John's daily routine and gradual ramping up of stakes as John's insubordination gets him into more and more trouble. Raven's backstory with Kelly, John's pseudo-plan for escape, John's actual plan for escape, Calypso officially announcing the tournament, and John reuniting with Quiet, as well as his sister. It's a lot, and as a result, I feel like this episode kinda suffers. It's a mess at first, and not even a fun one. It's simultaneously boring, and moves at such a breakneck pace it's hard to keep up. I was actually afraid that this was an indication that they were going to drop the ball for the whole season. It wouldn't even be the first time I encountered a disappointing second season of a show I really liked this year alone. And yes, Craig, I will continue to bang that drum until I've extracted the amount of enjoyment that I should have gotten from the second season of your show! That was a voice crack, but I'm keeping that in. But I feel like once John initiates his plan of escape, the episode does pick up, and I start to regain my confidence in the show. I especially liked John's plan for escape. Preying on the most naive guard, keeping an eye on him, and making him think that John was going one way, but then he goes a completely different way. As far as the characters we're familiar with, Sweet Tooth, as ever, is great. Samoa Joe, overdubbed by Will Arnett, reprises their role as the flaming-headed clown, and once again, I've got no complaints. The physical acting of Samoa Joe is so textured that he conveys the psychotic showman energy just through his body language alone, to the point where you could probably watch this show on mute and still know exactly what kind of character you're dealing with. He has a level of flamboyant energy that just pops off the screen, and he's also able to flip the switch between hilarious and absolutely terrifying on a dime. I can't express my appreciation for him enough. Every time he's on screen, it's solid gold. One of my favorite parts of the entire season is in episode 4. This episode takes place in Diesel City, a reference to a level from Twisted Metal 2012. This is where the most powerful weapons in the country are bought and sold, and you have to trade some of your gas for currency. So while Stu is stressing about which weapons to buy for the tournament, Sweet Tooth, for no reason other than having a flair for the dramatics, decides to spend their remaining currency on a cape. A velvet cape that allegedly belonged to Dracula, and the amount of mileage they get out of a cape is amazing, including the part where he wraps people in the cape and snaps their neck in order to hide violence from the Diesel City guards, who have a strict no-violence policy. Sweet Tooth's story arc involves him wanting to be the greatest and most famous murderer known to man. Every time he hears, "I know who you are, you're," insert name of famous murderer here, he flips out and has to track down said murderer. The first of which is a character called Big Baby, which isn't a Twisted Metal character, so I had to look up to see if the character was from another game tangentially involved, like maybe Rogue Trip. I thought his design and gimmick felt too developed to be original, but I couldn't find anything. Matter of fact, the first episode has so many original characters, I was afraid that they were going to overpopulate the show with original characters. Thankfully they don't, and Big Baby is a one-scene character, so you wouldn't want to waste a named character from one of the games on that. Kinda like how they wasted something like 6 named characters in a single episode in Season 1. And since they have a finite pool of named characters, they're probably looking to be a bit conservative with it now, because who knows how many seasons they want to get out of this. Sweet Tooth's desire to be a world-famous murderer is his initial motivation for joining the Twisted Metal tournament. And this comes right after a scene where Sweet Tooth tells Stu to organize a tournament of all the greatest murderers in the country so that Sweet Tooth can prove that he's the best.
We get the best killers in the country, and we have them face off against you in a battle royale tournament or something.
He even makes it a point to mention how Stu has a lot of work ahead of him in organizing the tournament, and then Calypso announces the tournament, and I thought that Sweet Tooth was gonna be like, "Man, how'd you organize the tournament so quickly?" So that was a missed opportunity. The relationship between Stu and Sweet Tooth carries over from the previous season, and it's a hoot. Stu was already a guy who got in trouble multiple times for not wanting to kill, but now he's forced to be with the guy who ostensibly killed his best friend and who expects Stu to kill with the best of them, and while Sweet Tooth is having the time of his life, Stu is just sitting there absolutely dreading the moment the other shoe drops. But then after a while, through extenuating circumstances, he's forced to commit a full-on massacre against a crazy sex cult, and he realizes that he might actually like the violence. Not only does he like the violence, he might actually have more in common with Sweet Tooth than he could ever know. They make an appealing double act, and not just because they're a couple of fat asses! Sorry, I had to. He's fat! The most significant thing that happens in episode 1 is that the Twisted Metal tournament is officially announced. This scene is important for a couple of reasons. First of all, you'll notice that Calypso takes over all electronics nationwide, TVs, radios, you name it, all to officially give everyone with the balls a time and place to go.
Will you drive?
But if you recall, the apocalypse in this show happened due to all the electronics nationwide malfunctioning simultaneously. I'm sure that won't come up. Second of all, and most importantly, this is when we get our first look at Calypso, being played by Anthony Carrigan. And you know what? I had my doubts, but I think he does a good job for what they're going for. Because this isn't attempting to be a particularly dramatic telling of Twisted Metal, it's attempting to be more cheeseball. He mixes equal amounts of earnestness and cheesiness into his performance, and I think he fits the bill visually. Calypso as a character has taken on many forms. If you've followed this channel for any length of time, you're no doubt familiar with all of them. This design is sort of a mashup of Twisted Metal 2012 and Black. He has the suit and hair from 2012, with an actor who has a very similar face to the character from Black, and I like it, especially in the face. He has a very distinctive ghoulishness that sells the devil in a fancy suit style of character. And if he's a snake oil salesman, he's trying to make you pay with your soul. Although he reminded me of someone who I couldn't quite pin down for a while, and I think I know who now. Harland. He wrestled in NXT 2.0 for a minute. He was like a sort of serial killer type character. He wasn't any good. Of course, despite the fact that Sweet Tooth is by far the best character, Anthony Mackie as John Doe is still the main character, and I will admit I was a bit iffy on him at first in this season. I would say his episode 1 persona was pretty much a natural extension of who he was at the end of season 1. A lovesick man desperate to escape and get back to quiet, but still trapped in a walled city. He's hopeless, and any positivity he expresses is a facade as he's trying to think of a way to get out of his current situation. You'd think his character would pick up where it left off as soon as he and Quiet reunite, but not quite. In fact, I would go as far as to say that episode 2 of the show is the worst episode all around, if for no other reason than John Doe and Quiet are both incredibly unlikable in this episode. You see, before the Twisted Metal Tournament had been announced, the dolls were making a big game about wanting to tear down the walls of one of the major cities. Because disrupting the supply lines is one thing, but true equality can't take place until the walls come down. Quiet believes in the cause, but doesn't want to risk their lives, so is determined to enter the Twisted Metal Tournament in order to wish for all the walls to come down so they can get what they want without risking any lives. That makes sense, but then John Doe discovers he has a family cabin somewhere and wants Quiet to abandon the doll's gig and go with him. And when she decides she's not into that, he decides out of nowhere that he's so deeply head over heels in love with this woman that he becomes a controlling boyfriend who refuses to let her enter the tournament as if it's his choice. He even weakly accuses his own sister of brainwashing her because he's so deluded.
You brainwashed Quiet. So I don't know, unbrainwash her now.
Wanna try that shit again?
But Quiet is no better. We saw her at the ending of season 1. We know she likes John, but she immediately treats him with a level of aloofness and coldness to such a degree that it comes across like she doesn't and never liked him. Thankfully, this dynamic of theirs ends by the end of the episode, and by episode 4, they're pretty much back to the point they were at the end of season 1. And I find it very cute, because I find them to be a very simple but compelling double act. You have this absolute goofball, loudmouth, endearing idiot in John Doe, and you have the stoic, sarcastic, sassy hardass in Quiet. And their dynamic plays so well off each other, especially in the moments where their mindsets align.
Yeah, this is taking forever.
And there's actually genuine moments of tenderness in there, in between the arguing and, the sex. As a matter of fact, there's a big chunk of episode 4 I just can't show you all. It's basically just this meme. Like, I swear, this show was already pretty horny in the first season, but season 2, at least for the first couple episodes, might be one of the horniest shows I've ever watched. At least of those that weren't exclusively about that sort of thing. It's to the point I'm half expecting Collective Shout to try and get the show pulled. And hopefully that's a reference that will age poorly, because if there's any god, the entirety of Collective Shout will die of anal bleeding. If you want proof of how horny the show is, Stu becomes a sex slave at one point, except he's totally into it. And it's one of the funniest things in the show. And that's not even to mention Anthony Mackie, who takes off his shirt so often I was considering taking a running tally. But in case you're wondering, 5 times in 4 episodes. And in 2 of those instances, he was entirely in the buff. But hey, Stephanie Beatrice gets in on the action somewhat, even though it's played for laughs.
Hello, boys.
You can't be serious.
But my god, everything about episode 4 from the moment they get into the hallway with the lasers is friggin' amazing. I can't do this scene, the moments immediately after, or the entire episode justice, but my god, this sequence is amazing. And the part where Stu walks in on them, possibly the funniest joke in the entire show so far. But once we get back to the point they were at before, the conflict is done for the time being, and so what is John Doe's primary story arc for the first couple of episodes otherwise? Well, John Doe wanted to run away from everything, find a quiet spot to hide out, and live for the rest of his life. But it's actually in episode 4 where he decides he's on board with the whole winning the tournament and tearing down the walls thing, because John Doe and his crew go to Diesel City, coincidentally at the exact same time as Sweet Tooth and Stu. The point here is they need to get the heaviest weaponry they can get, and so they disguise themselves as a couple of executives from a major city who are looking to buy special weapons ostensibly for the sake of protecting their city from outsiders, but they're looking to rig up their cars. Incidentally, they're referred to as special weapons. I'm happy they didn't try to come up with something less video gamey. As a matter of fact, every single weapon in this showcase is a special weapon from the games, and this part cracks me up.
Ghost missiles. I wonder if they could go through walls.
Every missile goes through walls.
Well anyways, seeing all these high-ranking city officials so casually talk about how they want to use these massive weapons on innocent people living outside of the cities for the sin of being outsiders is enough to push John over the edge. The breaking point is when they mentioned that New San Francisco recently vaporized all the non-citizens that were hovering outside of the city walls. We may have only seen those people for a couple of scenes, but we know exactly who they're talking about. But the fact that we hear about them being vaporized but don't see it does kind of bring up the issue that a lot of the world building is tell don't show. We only have their word for it that things are bad out in the wild and are only getting worse. It's kind of a universal issue with the show, possibly due to budget reasons, but I would like to see more of the world. especially as it pertains to our investment in certain characters succeeding in their goals to bring down the walls. Why should I care about them bringing down the walls if I'm not seeing what's at stake? The other part of John's character arc for this portion of the show is reconnecting with his family and his apprehensions therein, basically being afraid of who he might be if he remembers his past. He doesn't want to be weighed down by all the things he's lost, so he's content not knowing who he is. And Dollface, aka Krista, obviously wants to reconnect, but John is so closed off to the point of being unnecessarily hostile. This is obviously their primary story arc, but she does kind of force the issue. There's a good chunk of episode 3 which is dedicated to her taking John to a drive-in movie they both used to go to see if it can jog any memories. But of course things go wrong. At first they encounter these weird shockwave beacons that prevent them from leaving, and when you think of shockwave beacons, who is the Twisted Metal character you think of? Oh hell yeah, this is when they introduce Axel. And as far as an adaptation of Axel, this is everything I wanted. This must have been a bitch to make, but it was well worth the effort. It looks and functions perfectly on screen, and while the initial action scene isn't the greatest, it's effective. And Michael James Shaw absolutely looks the part. Dude is jacked, and he carries a real menace on screen. Funny story though, I'm going to preface this by saying I'm a wrestling fan, but I think most wrestling fans are a cabal of absolute morons who live in a bubble. As such, I remember some fan casts for Axel which included Bobby Lashley. And I'm just like, yeah, he looks the part, but the dude can't act his way out of a paper bag. It's the same thing when I saw some wrestling fans similarly pushing the idea that Triple H needs to play Kratos in the live-action God of War series. Guys, once again, he looks the part. But have you seen The Chaperone? Triple H is awful. One issue with his introduction, though, he shoots the two siblings on sight, presumably because he was instructed to, but the next time we see him, he doesn't. They killed the scientists that did all the horrible experiments on him, but he doesn't know that in this moment. So surely, if he had the instruction to shoot people on sight, he would have no reason not to shoot them here. So that's stupid. I would have almost accepted it if they didn't give me massive blue balls in the next scene. Axel is free to go now that the scientist is dead, so he leaves, and just so happens to run into the B-plot, which involves Mr. Grimm, who was also introduced in this episode in a rather effective cold open. And the two of them get into it. This lasts all of 10 seconds. I know they don't want to give away too much before the tournament, but you can't tease the audience like that. It doesn't help that this is probably the least action-heavy episode in the season. For the first several episodes, they make sure to have at least one major vehicle action scene, and will sometimes throw in a couple of regular action scenes on top of that. But in this episode, the bulk of the action is running and hiding, and this is the dedicated vehicle action scene, so this had the chance to really end the episode on a high, and they blew it. But speaking of the B-plot, it would have been very easy for Quiet to become an afterthought in the season, and I will say she's not an afterthought, not by a long shot, but of the main cast, she's probably the most static. She is essentially the same character she was at the end of the last season, just with more experience as an activist. I have no problem with her whatsoever. It's just obvious that she already has the most complete character and most complete story of everyone. But generally speaking, she bounces off the crew really well, she has good involvement in the episode stories, and of course, who doesn't love Stephanie Beatrice? But since John is going to spend some time connecting with his sister, they did need something for Quiet to do in the meantime. Hence they introduced a little sidekick for Quiet called Mayhem, another original character. She is a chaotic gremlin. A chaotic, ethnically ambiguous gremlin.
I mean, we can handle this like adults, right? Yeah. You know, I was thinking the same thing.
She's introduced by robbing the doll's camp, including medicine and a gun. But after Quiet and John save her from a couple of cavemen, I'll give them as much ceremony as the show did, she basically stows away in roadkill because she wants to enter the tournament despite not knowing how to drive. She's only discovered because she's annoyed by Quiet's music choice. But then again, so was I. It was a total cock block. Quiet pulls out Kill 'Em All by Metallica, and I'm like, hell yeah, Seek and Destroy. Then Michelle Branch starts playing. The bastards. From there, Quiet ends up being a big sister / mentor character, teaching her the ropes of combat driving. Together they make a relatively appealing duo in the sense that Mayhem's chaotic energy and quite frankly extremely crass demeanor is the only thing that can counteract the stern brick wall of emotion that is Quiet. I still can't decide for the life of me if I like Mayhem or not. She seems to bounce back and forth between being endearingly annoying and just plain annoying. She does result in some pretty good scenes and some pretty good jokes. Like after the caveman fight when John and Quiet are complimenting each other on how well they fought and are doing everything but hopping on top of each other, and Mayhem says,
Where's that gun? I'd like to put it in my mouth.
Her whole thing is she wants to prove herself. She has a massive chip on her shoulder for whatever reason. She wants to become the best driver. She wants to help out even when she's told to stay put. She wants to win the tournament despite everything. And all of this because, as we later find out, she's been a lonesome vagabond for her entire short life. She's never belonged anywhere. So she will fight through hell, force herself into every situation, and overcompensate in every way possible to try and eventually find somewhere she belongs.
I wish... to find a place I belong.
I wanna heal, I wanna feel like I'm close to something real. Sorry. I would say she finds her place among the cast by the end, both as far as storytelling is concerned, as well as how I feel about her, but I don't know. I'm still a touch conflicted. Finally, of the main cast, we have Dollface, otherwise known as Krista, who's the character who I'm struggling to even come up with things to say. She's probably the least interesting of the main cast. Honestly, I was about to try and summarize her personality, but I'm drawing a blank. She's just kind of generic. Sometimes she can have a bit of a sassy attitude, which is fun, but otherwise I can't think of anything to describe her with. She does have her moments though. I think her highlight for the season was once again in episode 4 when she has to get to the crow's nest to unlock the special weapons vault. And she happens to run into Sweet Tooth, and he's immediately enamored with her, but due to circumstances, they have to fight. And it's a really entertaining fight. I'm sure some terminally online chud will complain about her going toe-to-toe with Sweet Tooth. And in that case, boy, I can't wait to see their reaction to that scene later on in the show, but here's the thing. He's going easy on her. He's established to have an immediate crush on her during this scene, so even though they're fighting, he doesn't want to actually hurt her. And even then, it takes a run-in from Mayhem to subdue him long enough to get away.
Masked lady!
Other than that, she serves her role well, being a strong leader to the dolls, and let's just say being the source of much drama in the second half of the season. Yes, as established, she's the leader of the dolls, and as a storytelling device, I'm a bit mixed on the dolls if I'm being honest. While a large majority of the gang doesn't show up after the first couple of episodes, they're kind of part of the reason why the first couple episodes, especially episode 2, are a bit rough. There's no way to say this without sounding like a bit of a chud, so I'll just say it and move on. I found the very overt themes of female empowerment in the first 2 episodes were laid on so unbelievably thick I found it cringeworthy. Even by this show's standards, it was incredibly unsubtle. I 100% support what they were going for with the themes and storytelling surrounding Krista and the dolls, but even things with the most positive intentions in the world aren't above criticism, and this was a case where instead of subtext, they had dom text. So there, I said it, I'm moving on. So that's all the major players and where they find themselves at the beginning of the tournament starting in episode 5. This part surprised me, because I knew that this season was 12 episodes going into it, so I kind of expected plenty of road trip based stories leading into the final battle akin to the first season. And I expected the tournament to take up maybe a few episodes at most. But we start the tournament before the halfway mark. Let me just say for the record, yes. You see, that's how you do pacing, Craig Mazin, you jabroni. This is what we've been waiting for, so they spend a third of the season setting it up, and the next 2/3 paying it off. And I'll just say right now, if you haven't seen the show yet, take this as my recommendation. Feel free to jump off now, because the tournament is the longest and the best part of the season. And you probably don't want that spoiled for you. Now that we're here, we know who the competitors are. They're a mix of named characters and original characters. Cleverly, they actually assign original characters to certain named vehicles that didn't have an assigned driver. Vermin, for example, was a selectable vehicle in Twisted Metal 2012, but because Twisted Metal 2012 didn't have a designated driver for specific vehicles, they can do whatever they want with it, hence this disgusting creature. Of the characters we might recognize, we have first of all Raven driving Spectre. You may be mistaken in thinking that Chucky Floop is driving Spectre, but he's actually driving Quattro. The Holy Men from the first season show up driving Brimstone with the alleged reincarnation of their leader, which is probably an indication that they deeply regret killing off Jason Mantzoukas. I would too. Then we have Axel, we have Billy Ray Stillwell driving Junkyard Dog, we have Mr. Grimm, of course we have Sweet Tooth being driven by Sweet Tooth, as well as Stu, and then there's Hammerhead. Oh my god, I popped so hard for this. So as it turns out, Mike didn't die when he was attacked by Sweet Tooth. He's alive, if scarred. But in the time since the end of Season 1, Mike has found a new homie named Dave, a former cannibal. I literally said out loud, yo, they did the thing. If you're a regular watcher, you probably already know what I'm talking about, but just in case anybody's watching the show who doesn't, in the first Twisted Metal game, Hammerhead was driven by the duo of Mike and Dave, while in Twisted Metal 2, Hammerhead was driven by the duo of Mike and Stu. It's been long speculated about whether or not these two pairs of characters are two completely separate sets of characters, or if Mike from Game 1 is the same Mike from Game 2. While not only did they say yes, it's the same Mike, they actually made it a plot point. I was so happy when I saw that. That's the type of Easter egg that I turbo appreciate as a fan. The only other character we get introduced to at this point is Death Warrant, another character along with Vermin, who's an original character based off a vehicle from Twisted Metal 2012. He gets killed by the end of the episode, so it doesn't matter. Then there's an original character called Frostbite, which is visually introduced but not officially introduced. We definitely know there are other characters outside of these ones, but they go unnamed for now. Some of them remain forever unnamed, like this group of knights who are the very definition of fodder, to the point I'm surprised butterflies didn't come out of them when they died. Once the characters are introduced, this is where we get into it. Say what you will about the rest of the series getting up to this point, and I'm no gatekeeper, however I will gatekeep. If you watched the second half of episode 5 and didn't love it, I don't think you're a real Twisted Metal fan. This is the first official salvo of the Twisted Metal tournament, and I had a smile you could not remove with a sandblaster watching this. It's just a qualifying round at this point, but it's still filled with all the action, all the stunts, and all the cheese. Arguably the best thing about this scene is the soundtrack. Those crazy motherfuckers actually did it. They licensed Dragula to play over this scene. And the funny thing is, in my Season 1 review, I specifically remember saying the only thing that would have made the final battle better was if they played Dragula over it, and I was given crap for it in my comment section because Dragula is not the Rob Zombie song most associated with Twisted Metal. That would go to Super Beast, but here they are, not playing the song most associated with Twisted Metal, but the song that I suggested they play. I'm not definitively saying that I'm the reason this happened, all I'm saying is there's a non-0% chance that somebody on the production staff saw my video. But either way, I can't gush about this enough. This is when I feel the season finally arrived. The first 3 episodes were a bit of a mixed bag, episode 4 was great, but this is awesome. My only complaint is that it ended too soon. Before the credits, this episode is only 25 minutes, and they end it right in the middle of an action scene. It sucked having to wait for the payoff, but either way, this scene and the second half in the next episode will basically set the tone for the rest of the season. And as you watch, you can almost feel the shift in presentation between the first 4 episodes and the last 7 episodes, with episode 5 as the buffer between the two. As soon as the tournament begins, it's almost a completely different season.
Welcome to orientation!
First of all, it's where they introduce a new primary setting for the show, an old high school called Jaffe Campbell High School, a reference to the series creators David Jaffe and Scott Campbell. They filmed this at an actual dilapidated high school based out of Hamilton, Canada called Delta Secondary School. Pretty much the entire show from this point forward outside of the combat is set in this location. Makes you really notice where the budget in the show went. They obviously spent so much on elaborate action scenes that the rest of the season has to really scale back. Not that I'm complaining, they knew what was important. Although it's funny when I think about it because this dilapidated high school is the closest this show has come to feeling like an actual post-apocalyptic setting. Because we still have that issue from the first season where there seems to be no scarcity in this world, and everything seems to be running properly with a good amount of electricity and clean water. So it just doesn't feel legit in a lot of cases. This is the first time something feels properly a bit dilapidated. This is also when new stories start, and when brand new character dynamics begin to be introduced. There's a lingering mystery between Calypso and Raven, and seeing Raven on the back foot the way she is with Calypso makes her a far more deep and almost sympathetic character. You get some real strict, unimpressed father / meek, self-conscious daughter vibes from the two, and you find yourself wondering what their relationship was before the tournament on account of everything we've seen so far. Like how Raven knew about the tournament before it was officially announced.
You and I've been supposed to be here.
Yeah, well, plans change.
No, plans don't change. Otherwise it wouldn't be called a plan.
We never find out what their relationship is, but looking at the two of them, I'd imagine the answer is pretty easy to figure out. Either way, I would say Raven definitely comes into her own during this portion of the show, showing far more vulnerability and tenderness than one would expect given her tough demeanor earlier in the season, especially when shit-faced.
Yeah, I'm a lesbian. Do you have a fucking problem with that?
Nope.
Axel loves the lesbians.
Also, I would just like to say, goddamn. She still maintains a tough, pompous demeanor for a good chunk of these episodes, but it's where you realize that she's more than that. Then there's our lovable goofball Stu, who's now unsure about things. He really just wants his friend back, but we have John Cena Jr. standing between them, then he gradually gets back into the group. I love the Dumb and Dumber reference, by the way. However, a single faux pas leads the story of the three of them to come to a head in a really morbidly funny way. Meanwhile, Sweet Tooth goes from being lovably abusive to just being a straight-up dick to Stu. And they do a good job at making Sweet Tooth shift between charming and unlikable as the scene requires it, because there are times when they use him mistreating Stu to juxtapose against the longing that Stu feels for his old friend.
Besides, with a pillow fort, you get to have a password. It's Mecca like a high Mecca honey ho.
Wait a minute, is Sweet Tooth Jewish? They really make you root for Mike and Stu making amends and getting the band back together, while fully knowing that Stu is one accidental slip of the tongue from finding himself with a Colombian necktie. Plus, there's also the intrigue between Sweet Tooth and Mr. Grimm. They despise each other, so what makes their relationship so unbelievably hostile, and what's their history? We know they came from the same insane asylum, but what caused their rivalry? And of course, there's John and Quiet, who keep managing to find compelling new wrinkles in their relationship. They come and go as the story unfolds, but they keep you guessing. John fucks up in a big way, and it makes you wonder if they can get past it, and how it will affect the rest of the tournament. It's all good stuff. Honestly, there's a lot of good stuff here. I would say every character during this portion of the story really comes into their own, especially the relatively minor characters. At least those who aren't specifically put into the story as fodder to kill off. I can't possibly say enough good things about Axel. The dude is impeccable in his performance. He rides the absolute perfect line between hilarious and absolutely terrifying, and while the CGI isn't the best when it comes to him, I can accept it because the practical effects are great and everything else to do with the character is outstanding. In fact, he's pretty much the star of episode 8. They introduce his backstory, which then plays into his arc for the rest of the season, and in this particular episode, he has to overcome massive trauma to save the day.
I fought as hard as I could, but they knocked me out. The last thing I remember is that baby screaming.
And it leads to an absolutely glorious scene set to that one Crash Test Dummies song where he eviscerates a team hired to kill the combatants. Like, he straight up Helios one of those guys, which is the best kill in this episode, although this guy getting Kung Lao'd is a close second. The team sent to kill them is called Apocalypse 9, and I thought I remembered hearing that name before, and I found it's the deepest of deep pulls. The Apocalypse 9 group were originally driving the APC at the end of the first game before they decided to scrap that idea in favor of Minion. That's a deep cut on the level of that time that Crash Team Racing Nitro Fueled introduced a character based off concept art that was actually someone accidentally leaving a personal drawing in a concept art folder. And honestly, the deeper the cut, the better, because it just shows that these people know what they're doing. But going back to Axel, after that glorious scene, in the following episode he shows up to a formal event in a bow tie and a white bib. Just seeing that cracked me up, as if this guy is allergic to wearing a shirt. He is an absolute treat. Aside from Axel, the other two characters that really shine in this segment of episodes outside of the main cast would be first of all Vermin, who evolves from disgusting bug person, only good for 1 or 2 random moments per episode, to the horniest person on Earth. And she has an incredible series of scenes with Raven and Quiet. I love the commitment to the bit, how she always talks in that weird voice and manages to push every single thing she does through the character's mannerisms.
I guess I'm not as prim and proper as you thought I was.
She probably ends up being my favorite original character they came up with, which only makes me more sad because I knew for a fact she was destined to be killed off by the end of the season. Then there's Mr. Grimm. When he's first introduced, he is basically a force of nature. But then they really play around with his main character quirk, the fact that he's 1,000 souls inhabiting a single body, and he basically just has a severe case of multiple personality disorder, and they're all constantly bickering with each other, leading to a lot of really great moments.
No more John. Good. Makes them easier to pick off if they're weak.
Like little fishies.
But you're never quite sure if he's actually a soul-stealing fiend or if he's just nuts and imagining all of this. I mean, I'm sure some people are probably disappointed because when they first introduced him, he had a real menace to him, what with him being this impossibly strong, thoughtless murderer. But now they've made him into a bit of a joke, but what can I say, this is an action comedy series. I'm fine with them making a character move back and forth between being scary and comedic. Unfortunately, the one character who kinda suffers during this time is Mayhem. She spends a lot of time just milling about in the background. She doesn't have a whole lot to do outside of the odd joke. There's a major revelation with her character, but it's a revelation that's more relevant to another character. So for as much as they invested in the character, I wish they would have invested more. That's the primary cast, and there are plenty of minor characters driving around, but most of them start dying before we can get the most out of them, or really anything at all. For example, Junkyard Dog, aka Billy Ray Stillwell, is killed off almost immediately. They talk a big game about his spiked catapult, but we never even see it used. Then there's Frostbite, who's eventually introduced as a big Russian woman who's killed off about as unceremoniously as it gets. The Holy Men also get killed off relatively early into the competition, but that whole thing had a really good setup and a really good payoff that went back as far as episode 4. But that's not really something you can help in a story like this. This is a story that necessitates people constantly dying to keep the action feeling legitimate. And it certainly does the job. The bulk of the car combat in this portion of the season are contained within 4 major scenes. I've already mentioned the introductory action scene to the Twisted Metal tournament, which is sublime. The second one, Warehouse District Warfare, meanwhile, is a bit more gimmicky, where there are 8 exit tokens to be distributed among 12 cars, and because the tokens were indoors, a good chunk of the action takes place on foot as opposed to in cars. So it didn't feel like it reached its full potential, but there still was plenty to like. That ice sequence, for example, had me in stitches. So a bit boring as far as these battles are concerned, but nothing bad. Maybe just a bit underwhelming. And the next battle is the lightning round, reference to Twisted Metal 2012. In this case, everyone has a single person they need to take down, and only those who survive move on to the next round. From a visual standpoint, this is probably my favorite episode in the show because, as I've said before, I'm a sucker for colored lighting, and this episode is chock full of it. I remember something similar happening in the first season, where there was a single episode where they were allowed to get weird with the lighting and camera work, and the rest of the season was shot in a relatively standard way. Not bad by any means, just not special. In this case, the entire season is pretty well shot in a standard way, save for one scene off the top of my head, the aforementioned ice skating scene, where they use quick camera movements to emphasize the comedy, and this is the only time they get weird with the lighting, and it's very striking. Oh yeah, there was also that first-person segment. That was pretty cool. The action is somewhat more of the same, but that's by no means a bad thing. If the qualifying round had sublime action, this has sublime action as well. Lots of stunt work and fun presentation. This is also when they start having fun with the weapons, because it's when Raven introduces this lightning attack, which makes for some pretty sick visuals. Plus, let's just say there's another famous special attack that gets used. This scene is also brilliantly juxtaposed with a fun multi-person interrogation scene, some really good jokes there. And then the final action scene, the penultimate episode of the show. This wasn't given a name other than the final battle, so I'm just gonna call it Fight for Your Life. That's what it was called in the first game when you put a cheat code in to play the first level with maximum enemies. They went all out for this. It's everything I want out of a battle in this show. Fast-paced, lots of explosions, brutal character deaths, more explosions, high-octane stunt work, plenty of fan-servicey goodness, and did I mention explosions? I feel like we're spoiled, honestly, because we had 2 great action scenes in 2 episodes. Not that they had much of a choice but to make these episodes action-heavy, because by this point, most of the cast was either dead or eliminated, and those who remained didn't have much character building left to go. But either way, I was pretty much grinning ear to ear during these last 2 episodes. It kind of got to the point where I couldn't even believe that this season started off a bit rough. There's just so much cool shit in this battle. Raven using cheat codes, the callback to the boomerang missile, Sweet Tooth lighting his head on fire for this one-on-one with Mr. Grimm. It's all great stuff. Now, I will say there was a moment when Sweet Tooth got Mr. Grimm on his shoulders, and I was hoping he was gonna give him a Samoan drop, because Samoan drops should be reserved for Samoans and fat people, and Sweet Tooth is both. Then, just when you think it's over, holy hell, they break out the big guns. They teased it before this, but now, it's here. Minion. and it's a Power Rangers villain. Yeah, I wasn't quite down with this. If they weren't gonna have Hammerhead be a monster truck, there was very little chance that they were gonna shell out to have Minion be driving an APC, but man, it's still a little bit disappointing. A man can dream, though. A man can dream. Even still, it's a fun sequence to end things on, and Minion has the power of a vehicle but on foot, which is pretty cool. They even pull a Worf on Sweet Tooth. You have Sweet Tooth, who's this impossibly powerful character to begin with, get absolutely chumped out by the new main threat to show the power of the new threat. Which was cool, and the twist winner completely caught me off guard. Incidentally, you may have noticed that I was referring to Minion by gender-neutral pronouns. There's a reason for that. Let's just say I don't want to spoil which side of the gender spectrum Minion falls on, because that's important. Much like at least 2 of the other action scenes, this action scene was sublime and I can't do it justice. This final fight was a capper in the same way that the final fight in Season 1 was a capper, and I can't do it justice. I only have a few issues with the second to last episode overall, and the first one is definitely a nitpick. First of all, they do the thing and set the final battle on Christmas Day. It should have been Christmas Eve, but that's not my issue. This tournament takes place in and around Indianapolis, Indiana. This is the Midwest. The Midwest is brutally cold, and there's not a hint of snow on the ground on Christmas Day. Second of all, while it adds to the show action-wise, for some reason, Jean and Quiet are able to drive 2 separate cars that represent one single entrance, so one of them could die, and they could still win the contest. That took me out of it a bit. Third, you remember how Agent Stone in the first season hallucinated the kid he shot right before his death? Well, they repeat that set piece for another character's death in this episode. I'm not sure if that was a deliberate callback, or if that was them accidentally repeating themselves. Fourth of all, they got the line wrong. The line is, "I am Calypso and I thank you for playing Twisted Metal." But he just said, "Thank you for playing Twisted Metal."
Thank you for playing Twisted Metal.
That should be a war crime. Surprisingly though, the final round is not the final episode. There's an entire episode after that. And I was curious to see what story could possibly be told once the contest was over. With that said, however, I won't spoil this episode. I will simply say 2 things about it. There's a chunk of it which is so mawkishly saccharine that I was counting the minutes until the other shoe dropped, and boy did it drop. And the other thing is, you know how Twisted Metal 2 had a subtitle that many people forget about? What is that subtitle? World Tour. Well, let's just say the next season is looking like it's going to take advantage of that subtitle. Though at time of writing it hasn't been renewed for Season 3. Fingers crossed. Man, once that final episode took place, I just sat there looking at my screen for a minute before texting a friend of mine who I know was watching the show, and I told him, there's no way I can give a negative spin to this season, which is a shame because that's half my job. I'm kidding, of course. Mostly. But honestly, I have no other way to describe this season other than it was lit. And that sounds cringe as hell coming out of my mouth, so you realize how fun this season had to be for me to describe it like that. Much like Season 1, this was not high art in the least. It was pure action schlock, and it's glorious. I would go as far as to say that this season shaped up to be quite a bit better than Season 1 as a matter of fact. Obviously there are things I didn't like about it, and the TV budget holds it back, but this is a really fun season of television outside of Episode 2. Like yeah, I enjoy my high art HBO drama series and whatnot, but sometimes you just want to watch a popcorn flick, something that's simple, fun, and doesn't take itself too seriously. I almost go as far as to say that I think it's harder in some ways to make something pure fun, because I feel like there are rules to make something dramatic that you can study and replicate, but there's no one hard rule set on how to make something fun, simple, but also coherent. It's very easy for something to devolve into meaningless slop. How many action movies come out per year that are just meaningless banal slop that you forget about in 2 seconds? Ironically, it takes a lot of skill to create something that's simple but in a memorable way. Twisted Metal Season 2 is everything I wanted out of it and more. I say, once again, suck it, Craig Mazin. That's how you do a Season 2. Alright, well I hope you enjoyed the show, and I hope you enjoyed this video. This is probably going to be my last Twisted Metal video for the foreseeable future. At this point I feel like the topic has sort of ran its course. I'm sure there are plenty of people who will tell me to just do X video or Y video, but if I don't come up with an idea on my own, it's hard to get excited about it. Besides, the topic was subject to a severe amount of diminishing returns after a while, and if it's something that viewers aren't interested in and I don't break even on it, it's something that benefits nobody. These days I get a lot more creative fulfillment and a lot more viewer engagement just making videos on topics that interest me, and theoretically no one else. For some reason, the topics I think won't interest anyone interest the most people. So Twisted Metal will return just as soon as it's something that becomes creatively fulfilling and something that viewers are interested in again. Don't know when that'll be, but it'll happen eventually. That's all I've got. Thumbs up all around. A bit of a messy start, but I thoroughly enjoyed Twisted Metal Season 2 and look forward to Season 3 if it gets renewed. Let me know what you think of the show in the comments section, and don't forget to like this video, subscribe, and hit the notification icon so you're always up to date on what I'm doing. I've been the Monarch of Snark right here on Tactical Bacon Productions, and I will see you next time. Stay crispy, my friends.